Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 167 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle. I'm down here in the bunker after several weeks of being away. So if the listener, be charitable. We have to kind of shake off some of the rust here.
Yes, the dust.
Yep. But across the table from me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Dr. David Noe. Dave, you've done some traveling.
I have.
You've been here.
I've been here. I've been there.
You've been
all
hither
over.
and also yon.
That's correct.
Yeah.
For the first time, I dipped below the equator.
Is that right?
I have entered and exited the southern hemisphere successfully for the first time in my life.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you want to tell the audience a little bit about it? Yeah.
I spent 2 weeks in Uganda, at a little place called Mbale, Uganda, which is one of the country's larger cities. Uganda is the Pearl of Africa, and the Orthodox Presbyterian Church has a seminary there called the Knox School of Theology, KST.
Yeah.
And so I went there. Now, you might be saying, Uganda's not below the equator. Okay, fair enough, but I had to dip down into Rwanda and land at the Kigali airport.
And that's where you connected to Uganda?
And then to connect to go back up across Lake Victoria.
Yes.
Which I was thinking, this is not as impressive as Lake Michigan.
And is it?
No, but it's still pretty amazing.
It's a big lake.
That's right.
Right.
And then landed in Uganda, went to Mbale, and taught Greek for 2 weeks.
And how did that go?
It was fantastic. I had such an excellent time.
Yeah.
I had 14 young men in my class, and many of them were Ugandans. Some were from South Sudan. Fantastic students.
Really?
And, they were learning in what I think American students would in some ways consider a suboptimal environment. Mm-hmm. The lighting wasn't great.
Yeah.
I can tell you, Jeff, from firsthand experience, that the problem of dry erase markers is universal. If someone could make a dry erase marker, maybe Elon Musk can do this, like MarkLink. I don't know. You could download the ink directly into your pen from some satellite,
right?
So you'd never run dry. Universal problem.
So you were up there like, this one's dry.
This one's dry. Next.
Next.
But one of my students, a young man named Dang, was quick, and another fellow named Francis, both Southern Sudanese fellows, were quick to go get me markers so the teaching could continue.
Fantastic.
Just wonderful, excellent scholars and really nice folks. Had a really good time.
That's excellent. That's right. So, how did this invitation come about? Like, how did you? What were the connections?
Again, I'm a member of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, a ministerial member, and they needed someone to teach Greek, and I'm able to do that. So there we go with the invitation, and it was excellent. And I kind of I had to take endless vaccinations and so forth before going.
Yeah.
Dodging mosquitoes, don't want to get malaria.
Yeah.
The very last day, I don't think this is what the kids call TMI.
Yeah.
Too much information.
Right.
The very last day, I walked into the restroom, and peering at me out of the toilet was a gecko.
You got to be kidding.
No. I looked at him, he looked at me, and one of us darted back down the sewer pipe. It wasn't I.
It wasn't you, right.
But, I lived into the situation. It's not like the United States, and it's a different climate. It's tropical. But some of the great comforts we enjoy in this country were not enjoyed there.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm suffering, but you just have to adapt. And after a couple of weeks, I was able to adapt. So that was really nice.
Fantastic. Now, was your schedule packed? You could do any sightseeing or
No,
anything
it wasn't
like that?
packed. It was a lot of teaching. So 4 hours a day for 10 days.
Wow.
Intense Greek. I brought the Greek. Used a lot of Moss materials, actually.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. And they loved it. No surprise.
But I am assuming that the goal here is towards reading the New Testament.
That's correct.
Yep.
But Greek is Greek. So, if you want to learn it well, you got to start out at the, we'll save the ad to the end.
Right.
But then the afternoons I had mostly to myself. So I did a lot of reading. It was a little bit monastic of an existence, which I enjoy. And then I got to go see the Sippy Falls.
Sippy Falls. Okay.
Yes, on Mount Elgin, which is really amazing. It's an opportunity. It was pouring rain, but to walk behind the waterfall.
Oh,
it's like something out of a Tarzan movie.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I'll send you some photos. It was a great time.
I've only been able to do that like a fake waterfall, like an amusement park.
Oh, yeah.
But I've always wanted to walk behind.
No, this was the real deal,
man,
Winkle.
That's fantastic.
So a great time, had an excellent time there in
Very
Uganda.
cool.
The Pearl of Africa, they call it. An absolutely beautiful place.
Wow. Fantastic.
So how about you? What's going on?
Nothing that interesting.
Well.
So as I was telling you before we flipped the mics on, Zach, I'm in the middle of exam week at my institution.
Now, do you have to administer them or do you have to complete them yourself?
I have to administer them.
Oh, so it's the lesser of the two tasks.
Right, exactly. But I still get to complain about it.
All right.
Time. It's the worst part of the job.
Yes.
Where those papers pile up. And
Right.
So,
Teach for free, get paid to grade.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. So I got that tower of papers kind of looming over me until next week, and then I'll be free.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's a great feeling, isn't it?
It is. When you get those grades in and you hit submit.
Yes.
That's great.
It's a great feeling of release. Now, there's a Murphy's Law that applies to grading.
What's that?
And I know that many of our listeners are teachers themselves. I have been told that the amount of grading that you have exactly fills the amount of time that you have to complete it. So this has been my experience.
Yeah.
I look over at the desk and I say, 10 exams, 10 hours. I'll be done in 2 hours and I'll have 8 hours of free time. No,
it never works.
It takes 10 hours.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
It's quite remarkable.
Yep. So I'm not looking forward to, but I have a number of monastic hours in front of me of reading papers and looking at exams.
It's a good thing you got a great coffee maker.
That's right.
But we'll save that for later
we'll
too.
Save that for the ads, yeah.
So what are we talking about today? We got a shout out, but we can tease the theme. What is it?
Yes, we're talking about secondary sources.
Okay.
And in particular, secondary sources that you and I kind of came up with a short list apart from each other of secondary sources that have shaped us, shaped our thinking as classicists.
Either maybe sharpened our interest, driven us into a deeper understanding of things we only previously partially understood, or maybe in your case, as you're going to explain, drove us in another direction.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Or really helped me past some kind of particular kind of intellectual impasses that I found myself at.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we'll kind of see where this goes. I'm interested.
Secondary sources.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
But we have a shout out.
Yes, we do.
And Dave, take us into this.
Okay. So this is one of my good friends. Actually, he's kind of a super fan.
Okay.
I don't think he's Suzanne level super fan, but he's a super fan.
All right. All right.
DP is his name,
All right.
and he teaches Greek and Latin and other things. He's a Ciceronian like myself, out in the hinterlands. And he says, DP's first-year Greek student, a young man named Ryan H.
Okay.
Jeff, what do you think the H stands for?
Helluari Libris?
There you go.
Yeah.
He says, this is my second year teaching Ryan Latin and my first year teaching him Greek. I would say that he has really grown in his appreciation of Greek and Latin since listening to your podcast and watching your Greek videos for Greek class.
Well, he's all in.
Moss Method shout out.
Yes.
He's been listening to the podcast for about a month or so now, and immediately and with alacrity. Come on, DP. Alacrity? Isn't that something you scrape off your windshield in the wintertime? What is alacrity, Jeff?
It's swiftness.
All right.
Yeah.
Discusses the most recent episode with me as soon as it comes out.
All right.
He has even gone back and listened to at least one prior episode. Richard on the Classics in America. May he continue to be a fautor acroamatus vestri and helluari libris macte virtuta.
Fantastic.
Throws a lot of Latin on there.
Right. Well, this is kind of a double shout. This is more of a shout out to Ryan.
It's like intellectual grandson, kind of.
Yeah. Well, this is great.
DP got his own shout out, even as he was having us shout out Ryan.
Exactly.
Clever fellow.
Yes, a shout out by proxy. So fantastic. Well, that's really cool to hear. I love hearing. The student Ryan, he's not just listening to the podcast, but he's taking Greek.
He's taking Latin.
He's all. Do you have any idea?
What a champion, huh? I mean, this guy's a hero. He should be in Gladiator. If they make a Gladiator 3.
Yes, which I hope they don't.
De avertant, God's forbid.
Right.
He should star in it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Do you have any idea how old Ryan is?
He's early high school.
Early high school. Okay. Fantastic.
He's got many, many years for primary and secondary sources.
Indeed.
But also DP had to send along a quadrigendum, as he is wont to do. Can you read that, Jeff?
Yes.
I have to turn away in shame.
So DP says, you mentioned Porphyry and the Enneads, but it was, of course, Plotinus who wrote the Enneads, as you no doubt know better than I.
Yes, well, no doubt I do, but apparently I didn't, because I said the wrong thing. So.
Right, Porphyry, Plotinus.
Well, Porphyry, Plotinus, 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
Exactly. Right.
All right, so let's get into it then, Jeff.
Yes.
And some preliminary comments about What is a secondary source? Why a secondary source?
Yeah, I noticed when I assign papers in my classes this is often one of the first things I talk about, because this is not you can't just take that definition for granted.
No, people don't understand.
Right. So a secondary source is in a nutshell, I would say this is scholarship written about primary sources.
Correct.
Yep.
That's a very good definition. Mm-hmm. Do you remember one of the first secondary sources that you ever read?
I not specifically the source, but I remember it was a freshman history seminar in college.
Right.
Where I really learned kind of how to use secondary sources.
And was that Professor Douglas Howard?
It was, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have him as well?
I had him also.
Yep.
He was kind of disliked for no good reason. I found him to be a fantastic professor.
I really liked him. I mean, he was, I found him very intimidating as a freshman.
In case he's listening, well, there's not much chance.
Right.
I don't mean that people had a visceral dislike, but they kind of avoided his class because of the high standards.
Yes.
And he was such a serious scholar that he's not the kind of guy to, kick back and have a beer with you, I don't think.
No.
I learned so much from him.
Yeah, I thought he was one of those guys that I took... I think one other class from him when I was a senior.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where I think once he would kind of run the gauntlet.
Oh, yeah.
That he kind of softened.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I took the intro Western Civ, and then I took the Greece and Rome course with him.
Oh, yeah.
So he did a great job.
But yeah, he definitely had that freshman seminar was like, I'm going to weed out the weak.
Right? And you survived.
I survived.
So he assigned some secondary source in that class.
And I remember just learning a ton about how to do scholarship on just a basic level.
Yes.
Yep.
Very important.
Now, how about you? Do you remember like specific secondary sources?
Well, I remember the specific secondary author. I don't remember what the work is. I probably could have looked it up, but it was in my intro philosophy course, the Philosophy 153, I think.
Yep.
Taught by the inimitable John Hare, fantastic scholar. It was something by Anthony Flew.
Anthony Flew.
Flew, F-L-E-W.
Okay.
Now, if I had his name, obviously, the thing I would write would be entitled "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,"
right.
But he's a serious philosopher. He's a British philosopher, if I'm not mistaken, and he's gained a lot of notoriety in recent years because of his rejection of atheism. He's not a Christian, but he has. I'm not sure he's even a theist, but he has rejected atheism.
So he's a former atheist himself.
Yes,
then okay,
yes.
all right.
And late in his philosophical career, this would have been in the the late '90s, maybe the mid '90s. He rejected the atheism, which he had for so long championed.
Was this the subject of the secondary source that
you
read?
No, it wasn't. Okay. It was some technical aspect of philosophy. But I remember reading this and just being stunned by the strength of the man's mind and the way he developed an argument. I thought, wow, people can really do that.
Right.
I was reading Plato in this class, a little bit of Aristotle, just an intro class, and then I read Flew, and I thought, this is really incredible.
Yeah.
I would like to do that someday if possible.
So you even saw a little bit of your future career.
Maybe just a glimpse.
An inkling,
who can plan those things out?
Right.
But a really well-written book, a good argument, even if it doesn't prove in the long run true or conclusive, can have a big effect on your intellectual imagination,
without a doubt,
for lack of a better phrase.
Yes.
And I was drawn toward that.
Right.
This is really interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So we've distinguished what a secondary source is.
Yes.
Now I want to know how old is this distinction? Because I was thinking about someone like Longinus, the Roman fellow who wrote De Sublimitate, on the sublime, and he wrote it in Greek. But we can't really date him too well. But it may have been first century A.D., maybe as late as second.
Yeah.
And it's a discussion of how to achieve sublimity in your writing. So it quotes Homer, it quotes Hesiod, if I'm not mistaken, some of the poets, even quotes Moses, which is kind of unusual.
Yeah.
And so now, is that a secondary or a primary? This is an interesting question to me.
Yeah. No, I think in that same kind of chronological ballpark, I remember from some graduate seminar the suggestion that the second sophistic, kind of 2nd century, 3rd century.
An era of your expertise, right?
Yes, to some degree, is an era in when you start to have authors from antiquity interested in and commenting on antiquity itself.
Right.
But at the same time, I've also thought of Aristotle and the Poetics as a kind of a first secondary, where he's talking about tragedy. Right. And among other things.
So how could we distinguish between what Aristotle is doing in the Poetics and what Virgil is doing in the Aeneid. Because you can't imagine the Aeneid without Homer.
Right.
It's impossible. Right. And yet we don't consider the Aeneid a secondary source on the Homeric poems.
Right. I guess, I mean, I think that I always, when I think of defining a secondary source has to have, you see an attempt to make an argument and an interpretation of a previous work.
Okay.
Now, you could say the Aeneid is an interpretation of Homer.
Yes.
But it's not an intellectual argument about trying to maybe steer the reader in a particular reading of Homer.
This is what Homer means.
Right.
Perhaps only in a very subtle way.
Yes. Yeah.
Not in an explicit way.
Right. I think for the most part, in terms of my own kind of classical background, the distinguishment of what's a secondary source and a primary source. Secondary sources are really only begin in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Where you have, kind of German and British and French classicists starting to write these things.
Good point.
And then primary sources are things that are written in Greek and Latin.
Right. Yeah, like Wolff's Prolegomena to Homer.
Yeah.
Famous secondary source. I have a potential other distinction.
Okay.
And you can tell me if this is right.
Sure.
And that's if it's boring, it's more likely a secondary source. If it's interesting, it's more likely a primary source.
Yeah.
And here's an example. In my lead up to going to Uganda, trying to be the dutiful, bookish person that I am, I thought I should get a book about the history of Uganda.
Yeah.
So that I know what I'm going into.
Yeah.
You would do that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Of course.
It's a great idea.
So I bought this book.
Uh-oh.
I'm not going to tell you who the author is. It was titled something like A History of Modern Uganda, and I couldn't get through it. I had a little bit of spare time. I finished everything else I had brought with me, and I had this left, and I just couldn't discipline myself to read it because it was so awful.
Just a snoozer.
And everything was in scare quotes, like history, right? Appreciation. I got very tired of it. And I thought, at this point, I would rather read a primary source that may be a little loose with the facts.
Yeah.
Because I might learn more.
Yeah.
Than a secondary source that's so precise with the facts, but just dull as dirt.
Right.
And clearly has an axe to grind in terms of telling. I want to say, just tell me the story.
Right.
Tell me what happened. You don't have to convince me that this is the most accurate understanding. And I see a little bit of Herodotus Thucydides in there, frankly.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But that's for another time.
Well, I think one of the big weaknesses in modern academia is kind of the sneering at the popular historian.
Yes,
right?
You're right.
I was thinking
the people who pay the bills, right? Because the popular historians do all the heavy lifting.
Right. So I was thinking about as you were talking. What's a secondary source that I've really enjoyed?
Right.
And I would never kind of hold up this gentleman as amongst the great scholars of all time, but a guy like Barry Powell.
Oh yeah,
whose classical myth textbook I've used in my myth class. He wrote a book on the Battle of Salamis,
right?
Which read like a novel.
Yeah,
and it was fantastic.
Right.
I read it on one long plane trip. It was incredible.
So now I read his one of his scholarly works, something like Homer and the Invention of the Greek Alphabet. So
something, that sounds familiar. Yeah,
and I learned a lot from it, but it was not riveting.
Really,
it was not. It was good to learn, but not a great read.
Not a great read, yeah.
And so maybe that's a measure of his skill, that he can write something popularly that is riveting.
Yeah.
And he can also be boring when need be
right.
for the scholarly audience.
Well, if you compare the two topics, right, I think if you're talking about the Battle of Salamis, you have a narrative built in, right?
Okay.
You've got drama.
Yeah, that's it.
And you just have to kind of, you've got to recognize the hooks and do your due diligence.
Yeah. So final question is, what's the right balance between primary and secondary sources in a reading diet?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, in your own reading, you say, well, I've covered all of the primary sources, so now I'm just pretty much in secondary. I can't say that for myself.
No, I certainly can't say that for myself either. And I mean, I think if I had to say, what's the right answer to this? If you're really interested in exploring some topic from antiquity,
right,
you read the primary source first, and then you go to the secondary literature. But I've often gone.
You've skipped it
the other way around.
Yeah,
right.
Well, some texts are much harder to approach than others. You kind of need some training wheels or an on ramp.
Yeah.
So I've read a fair amount of Thucydides for, again, him in English. Maybe the whole of it, I can't remember, but only a little bit in Greek.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the same taste for it.
Right.
But I've read a lot of secondary sources about Thucydides.
Yeah, yes, exactly, right. Well, I think that, like in terms of Greek tragedy, I remember in like teaching different plays, I will often try to find something by Charles Siegel.
Right.
And I found a lot of his articles and stuff that you provide kind of context and kind of tell me the bigger picture of the world out of which this play came from. That's really helpful. And then when I go to the play itself, I say, oh,
you've got some understanding.
Exactly right.
Yeah, the first time I read Hamlet, it was like that. There was an Oxford, the Shakespeare play. There was an Oxford edition, which had a wonderful gloss and explanation of all the words and what's happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed it much more deeply because I had a good understanding.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think there's arguments for going in either direction.
Okay.
I think it depends. What do you want to get out of the work?
Yeah.
What do you want to
enjoyment first of all?
Enjoyment, right? And
instruction.
What do you want to understand about the work? Right.
And then I would say, because I thought you were asking me a real question. So. And then in the third place, a repository of insults and put downs that I can use on friends and family.
You can keep in the chamber.
That's right. So we're going to start then, and we're going to start first with 3 Jeff books. Mm-hmm. For secondary sources and 2 Dave books, and then we're going to switch that after the break. So let's start with your first title here.
Yeah, so my first title is a book entitled Ancient Mystery Cults by one Walter Burkert. Came out in 1987 and published by Harvard University Press. And this was the book that, if you, listeners, if you've paid attention to the podcast, you know that the mystery cults is one of my areas of deep interest.
Yes, that and liminality.
Well, they're inseparable. And this was really the book that sucked me in.
Right.
It was an early assignment in graduate school. I had to pick a kind of a special topic, and my only job for that assignment was to build what is the core secondary bibliography for this, and then become very familiar with it.
Interesting.
Right. And so
the assignment was come up with a bibliography
for a topic.
This is what anyone who wants to know about this topic should read. That was the assignment.
Yep. And
it's a good assignment.
So I take these lists and talk to my advisor. And we talk about, why did you put this book on the list? Have you thought about this? And so that was also very helpful in kind of, addressing these questions we're talking about today. And so Ancient Mystery, this is a book that, it's one of these books that is a gathering together of a number of lectures, which are not always my favorite kind of books. They often kind of hold together very loosely.
They're too scattered.
Didn't
you contribute to a book like that?
It wasn't a series of lectures. I contributed a chapter.
Monsters and something like that?
It was
Oxford text?
It was a modern fantasy in the classical tradition.
Okay.
And I have an article in there about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So it was slightly different. It wasn't but this was a number of lectures that Burkert himself gave, and then he was persuaded to kind of cobble it together into a book. So it was kind of like this. It always strikes me kind of a lame excuse to put out.
I've done all this stuff. Let's find a way to get people to buy it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
However, I'm holding up the book right now. It's a slim volume.
Oh yeah.
And I like slim volumes that don't kind of beat you over the head with 150 pages of just footnotes.
Yes. Or like the one I tried to read with all these scare quotes.
Right. And so I read this book, and it really, hooked me on the topic of the ancient mystery cults. But it also struck me that Burkert was responding to a particular kind of personal issue that I was having at the time. So, as a believing Christian,
right?
I had when the topic of mystery cults would come up with my graduate professors, it was the first line of attack was always, Christian, it's just another mystery cult.
Yeah,
it's the same death and resurrection motif that had been around for.
That's all the Christian faith is. This was something they would say or present, or sub-theme, subtext.
Right, exactly. Right. So there was myself, and there was another. I remember in a particular seminar, it was known that we were believing Christians, and a professor that loved to kind of twist the knife. Yeah, which was really quite.
He would say, "We got 2 wackos here,"
more or less, right? And he would drop comments like these just to kind of show how ignorant and superstitious we were,
right?
And so, but this book, what Burkert, in some ways, I don't think this was this is not the thesis of the book.
No,
but in many places, he talks about, let's distinguish here. Let's say what does the evidence tell us about each of these mystery cults, and by lumping them all together, you don't do them any favors. You don't really help your broader understanding. So he distinguishes between the little that we know about the ones, kind of whose archaeological evidence and scattered fragments of text survive, and then in a later chapter he talks about, what about this? Paul uses the word mystery.
Yeah,
right?
Tom Mysterion.
And that was another thing that my professors would say is, well, look, even Paul is admitting that this is just a mystery cult by using language. What Burkert says, well, no, the word in Greek might be the same, but let's look at the context.
Yeah.
And it really breaks it down.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful for me in kind of understanding, okay, there's a lot more nuance here than this, that you can't just simply just dismiss.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a concept, and I haven't read Burkert, so what do I know? But there's a concept when I was teaching myth more frequently that I would often introduce to the students, and that is the notion of syncretism.
Yes, yeah.
The combining of things that appear similar at some superficial level, but in fact are quite different if you take the time, to peer beneath the surface.
Sure.
And I think that's such a simple idea, right? Similarity is not identity.
Yes.
Right? But human beings, we're so easily deceived. We see two things that look quite a bit alike, right? Along the lines of, Aeneas descended into the underworld and Odysseus descended into the underworld. So Christ, when it says in the Creed, he descended into hell, must be the same thing.
Right.
Well,
right.
Yes, there is a superficial resemblance, but there are so many other things that don't track at all.
Right.
How are you going to decide which ones are more important?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that takes, you can't be lazy when you're
right.
Right. That takes some work. And along the same lines too is I think also the same idea that adapting and adopting things, imagery,
right,
doesn't necessarily mean a cop out or a watering down.
Right.
So it always makes me think of in the Scavi, the excavations underneath St. Peter's.
Oh, yeah.
There's an early Christian tomb that shows Christ with the imagery of Apollo.
Right.
Right. And so I think the dismissive word, well, see, it's all the same.
Right.
But the adapting of that familiar imagery of kind of replacing the sun god
right.
with Christ,
right,
is not, that doesn't mean that there's the artist is saying, oh, they're just the same thing.
Right.
Right.
Nor does it mean that it was necessarily the regnant image or symbol that the entire church adopted.
Of course,
it could just be a simple one-off of this particular individual.
Exactly
like to
right.
do this.
Right.
If you were to comb through my childhood closet, you would find there an Easter bunny basket given to me by an extended family member.
Right.
An archaeologist someday would say, well, this was when Noe was going through his early pagan phase.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no, it was. Not everything is vested with the same level of meaning.
Yes.
Can you read us a quote from Burkert here? Because that would be really helpful.
I found a passage that I had underlined and highlighted way back in 1993 when I was doing this.
Wow, did they have highlighters then?
They did. They were very crude. They were kind of like dry erase markers.
Yeah.
It runs out halfway through the paragraph. Right. And so he's talking about, this is a chapter or a lecture that he called The Extraordinary Experience. And so he's kind of talking about when we hear about these mystery cults providing some kind of out-of-body ecstasy, what was that? And so he writes, to sum up, there is a dynamic paradox of death and life in all the mysteries associated with the opposites of night and day, darkness and light, below and above. But there is nothing as explicit and resounding as the passages in the New Testament, especially in St. Paul and in the Gospel of John, concerning dying with Christ and spiritual rebirth. There is as yet no philosophical historical proof that such passages are directly derived from pagan mysteries, nor should they be used as the exclusive key to the procedures and ideology of mysteries. So he's kind of marking out that what we read in Paul's letters and in the Gospels is strikingly singular.
Yeah.
And it's to kind of just broadly lump it in with all these mystery cults. Burkert says the evidence isn't there.
Right. Do you remember? Excellent. Do you remember when we were in Greece and I think we were in Epidaurus? And we were arguing about mystery cults a little bit.
Were we?
Yeah. Do you remember this?
Remind me.
Well, then you probably don't remember that I got the better of the argument either.
Right. Well, what was the argument?
It was along these lines. What did they mean? What did they signify? How do they differ from Christianity?
Yeah.
I guess you don't remember. Well,
I don't.
That's
right,
okay.
Right. So, okay, can we move on? Or is this
let's move on.
Is this going to be awkward now?
Oh, well, I mean, any more awkward than it has been?
But let's move on. Dave, why don't you give us one of your titles here? Yeah.
So the one I'm going to go with is Cicero and the Roman Republic.
Okay.
Which is by Manfred Fuhrmann, originally written in German and then translated. First issued in 1990. It's by Blackwell, Oxford, and Cambridge. And I take it to be the most authoritative and best biography in English of the man on whom I wrote my dissertation.
Okay.
And so I read this in grad school. There was another popular There was another popular biography circulating at the time, Anthony Everett.
That's the one I've read.
Yes. Yeah. And how was it? Because I didn't actually read it.
I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I don't have a lot of specific recall of it, but I remember that it also read very novelistically, and I really enjoyed it. Yes. But tell us about this one.
Well, what I really liked about this particular biography is that it was sympathetic to its subject, not uncritical, right? But sympathetic, which means you're getting the best possible interpretation of the individual about whom the story is told.
Yeah.
Even when there are legitimate criticisms to make. And the book contains many criticisms of Cicero, but not some of the more common ones. That he was a trimmer. In other words, that he was always and only interested in his own personal advancement, that you have to take everything that he says about noble ideals of liberty and freedom, that you have to take them as false, which has been a common interpretation since the time of the German Theodor Mommsen in 19th century. That's when Cicero hit his all-time low.
Okay.
And that all-time low actually began with Petrarch's discovery of the letters of Cicero. So before, right, Cicero was pretty high in people's estimation. We uncover his letters, his correspondence, and suddenly, he's a real person who was petty and backstabbing and so forth.
Yeah.
So maybe that was a needed correction, to the exaltation in which he was held.
Sure.
But let's not go too far in the other direction.
Right.
And let's represent him as a real person.
Yeah.
And so this book, 18 chapters, 220 plus pages. It's got a fantastic appendix with a family tree, a chronology, talks about his youth, talks about his marriages, all of this in extraordinary detail. And because I was writing my dissertation on his philosophy at the time, this book really helped humanize Cicero.
Yeah. Now, does it unfold like a biography? You say chronological. It's not like each chapter is devoted to some aspect of Cicero.
It's chronological.
Okay, yeah.
And I want to read a little bit of the epilogue here, which will serve as the epilogue also of talking about it. Mm-hmm. So this is page 220. He says, with Marcus, that is the son of Cicero, the undistinguished son of a famous father, our knowledge of the Tulii Cicerones peters out. The family faded once more into the obscurity from which Cicero's brilliant genius had rescued no fewer than 4 generations. So in other words, without this one particular person, nobody would know anything about this family.
Right.
He says then, at the same time, however, the history of Cicero's reputation began, a history which was not in the least impaired by the fact that posterity from the outset found so much to criticize in his life and his political career. Cicero became a favorite topic of an art which he himself had practiced in masterly fashion, the art of disputation, of controversy, of the in utramque partem disputare, arguing on both sides of the case.
Yeah.
So what I liked about this is that it presented him as a person with imperfect but sincere ideals who was actually extremely clumsy politically.
Yes.
He just always happened to be on the wrong side.
Yes.
Now, we don't know whether he was on the wrong side because his principles drove him to that, or if he was just not very good at reading the circumstance.
Yes.
And I think that's the interesting question, that the book investigates. So if you're interested in, the period from 63, the Catilinarian conspiracy, until the Battle of Actium in 31, that 32-year period, the most studied 30 years in Western history.
Yeah.
This is the book that will teach you what you need to know about Cicero.
Very interesting.
Out of print, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame. Was this something that was assigned to you, or something you picked up on your own?
Suggested, if I remember correctly, by my dissertation advisor, John Finnemore.
Yeah.
So I put it on my prospectus. These are the books I'm going to read.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic.
Fantastic.
So, Jeff, we got to go on now to your secondary source, and that is?
This book is I think it's still it's a very famous book, and it might be known to some of our audience out there, or a lot of our audience, is Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Yeah, we did an episode on this,
We
right?
did. We talked about
the Young and the Restless?
Yes, about the hero's journey and such. So, yeah, if listeners want to go back and listen to that, this will link up with this. But this is a book that I don't particularly like as a book in terms of like, sitting down and reading it.
Right.
His Campbell's prose is so over the top and flowery. Actually, let me start by just reading a bit, just to give the reader a taste.
Should they sit down? Should they buckle up, get a stiff cup of coffee or something?
All of those things, I would say. This is the very beginning of the book, under a section called Myth and Dream. Campbell writes, whether we listen with aloof amusement to the dream-like mumbo-jumbo of some red-eyed witch doctor of the Congo.
What?
Or read with cultivated rapture thin translations from the sonnets of the mystic Lao Tse. Now and again crack the hard nutshell of the argument of Aquinas, or catch suddenly the shining meaning of a bizarre Eskimo fairy tale. It will always be the one shape-shifting yet marvelously constant story that we find, together with a challengingly persistent suggestion of more remaining to be experienced than will ever be known or told.
Oh my goodness.
That's one sentence.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Can I take a pot shot at it before you...
Go ahead.
All right.
Yes.
So I love great stylists.
Yes.
People who actually really write well.
Yeah.
I don't love it when I have the sense, and people can no doubt say this about me, but I don't love it when I have the sense that the speaker or the author is in love with their own style, their own words.
Yes. Yeah.
I tried to read a novel by William Buckley, the famous conservative. And being a conservative myself, I thought everyone's talking about Buckley. This would probably be good.
Yeah.
I couldn't read it. It was the same kind. It was the same kind of experience.
Yes.
You really love the sound of your own word choice.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the impression that I get from Campbell.
Without a doubt, right? So probably a lot of the way in which a lot of people know about Campbell, maybe not so much anymore, but he did this series of interviews with Bill Hybels.
Oh,
not Bill Hybels.
No.
That's Bill, the guy from PBS. Bill something. I can't remember. Our audience might know.
I don't know.
But he did a series of interviews called "The Power of Myth."
Okay.
That was also kind of turned into a book. And I've watched a number of those interviews, and Campbell is deeply in love with himself. Now, I think he was
I mean, we all are to some degree.
Right.
But most of us have the good sense to hide it or try to hide it.
Or temper it with some humility. Right?
Yeah, or a show of humility, as I'm doing now.
But Campbell was clearly a man that was convinced of his own greatness, right? And so I always found that kind of off-putting about him, both like on the screen and on the page. However, I think that his kind of notion of the hero's journey and connecting the dots between narratives across cultures was one of these kind of necessary things that had to be done, right? So I put him next to the Burkert Mystery Cults book, and that I thought Burkert says, what a lot of people kind of lump together is kind of unified. Says no, let's break it up. Right. Campbell does the opposite.
Let's take things that are quite disparate and lump them together.
Right? And so, I mean, I think that Campbell did a lot of good work in kind of kicking down the walls between disciplines.
Okay.
And thinking about narrative in a new kind of way. I find his notion of the hero's journey in kind of breaking down narratives very useful.
Okay.
And in fact, like in this book, it's almost as if Campbell himself, while he was writing, realizes that this is a little much, and there's
I better dial it back.
Yeah, well, chapter 4 is this short chapter called "The Keys," in which he kind of breaks down the elements of the hero's journey very structurally. It's like it's almost as if like if you want to read one part of this book and just walk away, this is what you should read. But the rest of it is so flowery, and he's so in love with his versions of these stories. But so this book came out.
So that almost turns into a primary source. Maybe because he's not fairly evaluating the work of others. He's trying to synthesize something of his own.
Right. Yeah. In fact, the only kind of real thinkers that he bounces his ideas off in this book are Freud and Jung. And I mean, this speaks to the time. This book was first published 1949, 1950, which was where the kind of Freudian and Jungian analysis was starting to make its way into popular culture.
Oh yeah.
And so he really is in many ways just kind of giving us his versions of these things. There's not a lot of kind of scholarly footnotes in this particular book.
So as a secondary source for myth, would you recommend this to people who are interested in myth?
I would recommend his breakdown of the hero's journey. Okay. And I think you can find other later versions of this kind of summarized by other people that in some ways do it better.
Well, they could also just listen to the podcast we did on the episode and
of course,
save themselves a lot of headache.
Right. So he's my sense is that Campbell is he's kind of out of favor these days in terms of scholars don't think too much of him. I think a lot of it has to do with that because he became so popular.
Yeah.
And he became so associated with George Lucas.
Oh, yeah.
And all of that story, I think we talk about in that episode. And so I think he was kind of dismissed for both good and bad reasons. I think a lot of scholars don't like him today is it's almost like fortune telling, that the hero structure is so loose that you can kind of make anything fit if you want it to.
Yeah, like palm reading.
Yeah. Right. And I think also, I think where kind of the world is right now is scholarship doesn't like things that lump cultures together. They want to say, what they want to look at what makes cultures unique. Right.
Everything needs to be problematized.
Exactly. Right. And so, Campbell basically says, this is all part of this wondrous Jungian collective unconscious that is beneath the surface of everyone's skin and
so that's
going
to be unpopular.
Right. And so it definitely kind of reads like a religious tome. So there's a lot about the book that I do not like.
Yeah.
But I thought kind of his ideas, imagine trying to kind of collect stories and things from around the world, particularly stories that had never been translated before, which he did. Imagine doing that in the 1940s.
Yeah.
This was
without the internet.
Exactly. Right. It's an incredible labor that he completed. And so I tip my hat to him, even if the prose itself drives me crazy.
All right.
Right. Yeah, should we go on to a second book of yours?
So my second volume here is the very famous book called The Roman Revolution by Ronald Syme.
Yes.
So this was published first in 1939 by Oxford. And before dealing a little bit with some of the text itself and my experience of it, I want to read actually from that revered source, which is a secondary source, I think, Wikipedia.
Yeah.
The Roman Revolution, 1939, is a scholarly study of the final years of the ancient Roman Republic and the creation of the Roman Empire by Caesar Augustus. The book was the work of Sir Ronald Syme, a noted Tacitian scholar, and published by OUP. It was immediately controversial. Its main conclusion, I think this is really well said, Jeff, was that the structure of the Republic and its Senate were inadequate to the needs of Roman rule, and that Augustus was merely doing what was necessary to restore order in public life. So that's the main claim.
Yeah.
And that, to me, runs counter, right, to much of the previous discussion of that era, especially in, kind of the Whig version of history.
Yes.
Which is represented by many of my heroes, Burke and Lord Acton and others. And then you have Cicero, who is represented, not in Dante, by the way, but in the mainstream. Cicero is represented as the hero of the Republic trying to hold on to law, order, and conservatism.
Right.
And Augustus comes along and trashes it all.
Yes. Yeah.
So Syme takes a very different view. And that was my first encounter with this idea. And so it was fascinating.
Yeah. Really, really good. If a book's got its own Wikipedia article, that it's
pretty good.
It's left a footprint.
Yeah. So he says, it goes on to say, Syme relies on prosopography, study of individual characters, especially the work of German scholars Friedrich Münzer and Matthias Geltzer, to show the extent to which Augustus achieved his unofficial but undisputed power by the development of personal relationships into a Caesarian party, and used it to defeat and diminish the opposition one by one.
So here we see that secondary sources can also, not just a couple of primary sources, but he's also responding to previous secondary sources.
Exactly.
Right. So it's
layered. An endless interplay.
Yes.
For sure. And I think what first drew me to it was I had long known something about the American Revolution. Because if you're a public school kid in the United States, at least in the era when we were raised, that's pretty much all that I was taught.
Right.
Was American history.
Yeah, same here.
Then I encountered, and I like American history, but I don't like only American history.
Yeah.
Then I encountered the French Revolution, right? Reading some of the 19th century novels of Victor Hugo and so forth.
Right.
And then as an undergrad, I encountered the Russian Revolution, Solzhenitsyn and so forth. But then the notion that Rome had her own revolution, this to me was a fantastic title. And then the book really delivered on the premise.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what was going on in my imagination at the time. What? Augustus, was founding Rome a second time, but in a sneaky and unexpected way.
Yes. Yeah.
That was riveting.
Fantastic. Yeah. Do you want to finish the Wikipedia article, or are you?
No, let's go on to to an actual quote here from Syme in order to conclude this portion.
Okay.
So this is from chapter 33 of Syme, entitled Pax et Princeps. And of course, the chapter has a Roman numeral, right? Of
course.
No Arabic numeral. And anyone who has studied Tacitus, like Syme, is going to be a great stylist, and he is. So here goes. This is from page 509. When a party has triumphed in violence and seized control of the state, it would be plain folly to regard the new government as a collection of amiable and virtuous characters. Revolution demands and produces sterner qualities. About the chief persons in the government of the new state, namely the princeps himself, that's Augustus, and his allies, Agrippa, Maecenas, and Livia, history and scandal have preserved a sufficient testimony to unmask the realities of their rule. The halo of their resplendent fortune may dazzle, but it cannot blind the critical eye. Otherwise, there can be no history of these times deserving the name, but only adulation and a pragmatic justification of success. The guy can write, don't you think?
That's really good.
Yeah, it's quite engaging.
Yeah.
I don't know really in the end if his thesis is right, but you can't easily dismiss it. You have to treat it seriously if you're at all interested in Roman history.
Right. It reminds me of in my archaeology class, we were just looking at some of the monuments of the Augustan building program
Right.
in Rome. We look at the Arapakis.
Yes.
And showing the family of Augustus in a religious procession, kind of giving
Incredible.
this image of kind of old school piety.
Right.
Right. And that, but you mingle that with the brutality,
The prescriptions.
that Augustus did.
Right.
Somebody would argue maybe for the sake of maintaining control had to do these kinds of things.
No.
But the on the ground horrific things that Augustus and other Roman emperors had to do.
Right.
Balanced with
Had to do. Yeah.
Did or forced to do. Balanced with kind of the shiny
Right.
image of Golden Age or Silver Age Rome. Right?
Yeah. Speaking of shiny image,
Yes.
it's time for the ads.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing, these guys have been with us since the very beginning.
4 years.
4 years. They took a chance on these two knuckleheads like ourselves, and they are one of these companies that is keeping the torch alive.
That's right.
They are helping readers everywhere take in the classics and keep them down.
That's right.
And they have such a wonderful, huge selection of books. And as we've said many times in this podcast, one of the things that we love about Hackett is you can get wonderful, erudite, scholarly translations and secondary sources in an affordable, attractive package.
That's correct. It's not just some off scourings scraped together and slap a price tag on it and send it out. No, this is carefully done work.
Right.
Aristophanes with our friend Diane. You've got Stan Lombardo, whom we had on the show. You've got Plato and Aristotle. You've all these fantastic things that they are putting out. You've got the CDC Reeve, Republic Translation, Descartes, you name it, they have it.
Yes. So I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you're one of those people that loves to hold the physical book in their hand. Right.
Now they got ebooks too.
They do. But I think that this is a wonderful way to build your personal library.
Absolutely.
Physically or digitally.
Right. Build your personal library without breaking the bank.
Right. And so just a slight sidetrack. I have a nephew who's really getting into vinyl. Vinyl's coming back for music. And so for a birthday gift, I bought him an album and ordered, and it came to the house, and I held that in my hands like, okay, this really is cool.
You liked it.
I liked it, right?
Yeah.
And
because you and I, we transitioned through vinyl to 8-track,
cassettes, to CD, to now to just
digital
streaming.
Right.
Yeah. And so
pretty soon we'll get that brain implant and the music will come directly into our heads.
Right, exactly. That's next. But holding that piece of vinyl is often the same feeling when I get a buy a new book.
I enjoy that so much too. I love to go to the mailbox and rip it open and see, what did I get?
Exactly. And if you order from Hackett, you can do a lot more of that because the prices are so reasonable. So listeners, do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. Check out their massive offerings. And if you type in this coupon code into the little box, AN2024,
right,
that will get them, Dave, two things.
Well, they're going to get 20% off and free shipping. But I got to tell another quick story.
Please.
When I was in Uganda, guess what I saw?
What's that?
The source of the Nile River.
Is that in Uganda?
It is, at the little town of Jinja.
Wow.
I went through Jinja, and that's where Lake Victoria begins, the source of the Nile.
Wow.
So what Nero and Julius Caesar and the Greeks longed to see,
yes,
I got to see the source of the Nile. And speaking
incredible.
of Nile, there are other people who sell books.
That's right.
River-based online emporia. We won't mention them.
No.
But can they compete with Hackett?
No.
I think not.
No. So check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by that fabulous entrepreneur, Mr. Mark Helweg of Ratio Coffee. Jeff, did you have some coffee this morning?
Of course I did.
Okay.
Yep, I got up early before anybody else was awake.
Anyone else in the whole world?
No, it was 5 a.m.
Wow.
And I wandered downstairs, but one of my favorite rituals
Yes.
is prepping that coffee in my Ratio 8. Yeah.
So you used to be a man of the 6.
I did.
Now you're a man of the 8.
Yes, I am.
You've got the stainless steel.
Yep.
Fibonacci head, metallic veins.
All of it.
No scorch pad. No
course not.
brackish tang.
No.
No Kindle brick.
No.
What are you brewing these days?
I'm brewing, let me see, what did I get? I actually...
Haxwell Mouse.
I mistakenly bought a bag that was a branded... Have you heard of this show called Yellowstone?
Yeah, I have.
Right. So there's
little bits of buffalo in every sip.
I thought I was grabbing something, another brand.
Okay.
But I just threw it in my cart, but it was like a Yellowstone Ranch.
Oh, that's
coffee
the theme?
Yes.
So the coffee flavors are things like buffalo chip?
Buffalo chip. It's kind of I think I got leathery saddle. It actually it was not bad.
Something like, we could go on with this, but campfire bean.
So if I don't stop you, you're never
right.
going to stop, Dave. So it wasn't bad.
But it didn't taste too bad?
No, but I think that's because my wonderful machine can get the balance right every time.
There's a big smiling Kevin Costner on the bag or something?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, you have to turn him around when you press the button.
I don't need Kevin looking at me, right?
I haven't watched the show. I guess it's popular. But so you're getting good coffee out of
coffee,
that.
of course,
All
right? Yeah. Now, how about you?
Well, I was on this junket recently.
Yep.
I went to Uganda, and the coffee in Uganda is out of this world.
Do they grow coffee there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, on Mount Elgon and the confines, some of the best coffee I have ever tasted.
Fantastic.
It was really, really good. And a friend of mine, we'll call him Ben because that's his name, brought me back some coffee from Ethiopia, which of course is also phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah.
Ben's a recent listener to the podcast, actually. However, despite all the fantastic coffee, guess what my issue was?
What was the problem?
Well, I mean, I wasn't near the ratio, so the delivery mechanism was really lackluster.
That's important.
Well,
it's essential.
I'm not complaining,
Yes.
but I went through the drip stage. I went through a couple of different stovetop espresso things.
Yeah.
It was kind of an ordeal. I mean, some people really suffer. Imagine me trying to make premium coffee in these primitive kitchen conditions.
Right.
So I was really suffering.
That sounds very frustrating.
So I was very glad to come home to, guess what?
What did you come home to?
The Ratio 4.
Now, this is new.
I got the 4 in my kitchen.
Yes.
And it is so stylish.
Yeah?
None of the aesthetics are in any way inferior to the 6 and the 8.
Okay.
In fact, in some ways, they are superior.
Wow.
It's a really beautiful machine. Now, I'm still learning a little bit the process of brewing. It's a smaller batch.
Right.
I don't yet have the thermal carafe. But the coffee is equally delicious. It's fantastic.
It'd be nice to have it here in the down here in the
we'll have to
bunker.
work on that.
Right.
We'll have to work on that. What are you suggesting?
Well, I mean, I'm picturing is you got your Ratio 8, of course.
Yeah.
Now, is the Ratio 4 like sitting right next to it?
No, the Ratio 8 is in storage.
Oh, it's in storage.
You're getting awful nosy here.
Well, I'm trying to kind of figure out how this works because I think like something like the 4 would be perfect to take to the office
or to the vomitorium.
Or to the vomitorium.
Okay.
Right.
So let's say that they want to have deliciously simulated pour over. They want to skip the barista. They want to skip the line at the Bagel Brewery in Barnabucks,
yes,
something like
of course,
that. What should the listener do?
Well, they should go to ratiocoffee.com. That's RATIO coffee.com and check out these offerings. You got the Ratio 8, you got the 6, and now you have the 4.
Right.
Find the machine that you want. And if you want to make this investment in your coffee future,
Nicely said.
Click on the machine, and then Dave, what's our coupon code?
The coupon code for the month of December is as follows: AN, that's ad nauseum, CO, coffee, 5, and then the letter P.
Letter P. No.
And you're going to ask me, I suppose.
Yes. What does that P stand for, Dave?
The P stands for?
Yeah.
The P stands for premium.
Premium. Excellent.
Because you'll never have a better cup of coffee, I'm quite sure.
Yeah. So ANCO5P for the month of December, and that will get you 15% off.
That's correct. Order. You don't want to miss this. Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into it, guess what's happening?
What?
The clock is stalking us.
Oh, do we need to get out of here already?
Well, I mean,
we're getting close.
Not immediately, but it's getting close because someone's banging on the door of the vomitorium. I don't know who it is.
Right.
I may never know, but we have so much good stuff to cover.
We do. Yep.
Let's take one more of the title of Jeff's secondary source, and maybe we save the others for episode 168.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
That sounds good.
So what is your next title?
My next title is a collection of essays called Black Athena Revisited, edited by a scholar that I greatly admire, one Mary Lefkowitz.
Oh.
And
has she been on our program before?
No, we should get her if she's still with us.
I don't know.
I don't know, but I think she would be wonderful to have on the show. But this is the reason I put this on the list is because this was part of my awakening of how classics could get political.
Okay.
And I think, in my undergraduate study of classics, I remember I'm loving the study of ancient Greece and Rome, but I don't remember anything kind of devolving into really kind of pointed controversy.
Well,
right?
I think that's because we were at a small Midwest school that has a strong confessional identity.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I remember
Calvin College.
I remember some of that in my history classes. Came out a bit more, but in classics it was blissfully politics free.
I'm with you. That's what drew me to classics, honestly.
Right. And so when I was at Northwestern, this scholar from Cornell, Martin Bernal, came to speak on campus. And he was talking about this book that he wrote called Black Athena. And if our audience is not familiar, this was a book that made a number of claims along the lines of that a lot of what we credit the Greeks and Romans for, philosophy, religion, architecture, really has African roots.
Okay.
And it's kind of a stolen legacy.
Specifically Egyptian roots, right?
Egyptian roots, right.
Okay.
But then it quickly kind of became co-opted by kind of the move of Afrocentrism. And the Egyptians were kind of lumped in with kind of sub-Saharan Africans, and it became kind of this really big deal that the ancient Greeks and Romans had stolen all of their treasures and their wisdom and their knowledge and their art and architecture from Africa.
Now this entered pop culture,
It did, yes.
Maybe you're going to say that, but
please go, yeah.
You remember the Reverend Al Sharpton?
Yes.
He made a big deal about this.
Oh, I don't remember Sharpton talking
about the Greeks stealing. He had some very pejorative things to say about the Greeks and their predilections with respect to affection.
Yeah.
That's put pretty vague, isn't it? Pretty vague.
There we go. Right.
And that they were, in fact, thieves who had robbed Africa of all of its treasures.
Yeah.
And that Africa, which I don't think he really defined too well.
Right.
But that's what you do sometimes when you're a public figure.
Right.
Had given to the West all of the great things we like.
Yes. Yep. So to be fair to Bernal, one of the things that struck me is that I remember I walked into the auditorium to hear him speak, and to tell you the truth, I don't really remember anything about his talk, but I remember there was a vibe in that audience that was kind of ready to.
A vibe, you say?
A vibe that was kind of like ready to throw down, and it was just a really strange feeling. And again, it didn't erupt into anything, but there was something else going on here, and it shocked me. And so, to be fair to Bernal, I think a lot of kind of his ideas were hijacked and taken to a place that I don't think he himself intended.
Yes.
Classicists tend not to like Bernal. They say a lot of his conclusions, the way that a lot of what he takes Hiatus saying is kind of just at face value, is not good scholarship.
Okay.
And in fact, he's not a classicist. His expertise he's no longer with us, was in Chinese history.
Oh, interesting.
And so this book, Black Athena Revisited, was a volume of a number of classical scholars responding to Bernal,
okay,
and kind of unpacking and debunking a lot of these ideas, and debunking kind of the political radicalism that kind of was on the heels of Bernal's arguments.
Which maybe you're saying Bernal was not himself responsible for, but other persons saw an opportunity to use Bernal toward political ends.
Exactly, right. And like Lefkowitz, she also had another really wonderful book called Not Out of Africa, in which she kind of tackles kind of the Afrocentrist arguments such as they are. So
I looked up Lefkowitz, and she's still with us.
She is.
She was born in 1935, so she's 89, going on 90.
Yeah. So if she's still, if I had to guess, I think she's probably still kicking. And
yeah, imagine.
It'd be wonderful to get around. But I thought one of the things I thought that I like about Bernal is he's kind of like a Campbell in that he really kind of was kicking over things that really hadn't been kicked over before, like breaking down walls between disciplines.
Okay.
And so I think he's one of these necessary figures. Whereas I think one of the problems with academia is that it can get so siloed, right?
Oh yeah.
Even within the discipline of classics, you have these silos within silos, and he was like Campbell saying, well, what if we put Egyptology next to the classics, what would we find there? Mm-hmm. So I think he is one of these necessary figures. I don't agree with his broader conclusions, but he is one of these figures that kind of was a game changer.
So what is Lefkowitz doing then in Black Athena Revisited?
She's taking down kind of the really Bernal's reading of the sources.
Okay.
And basically saying you don't understand kind of what makes Herodotus tick. Right?
Okay.
And in some ways she's saying, because you're not a classicist, because you're not reading the Greek, because you don't know these things on the levels that classicists do, you're not reading these things in the proper light.
Superficial.
And you're jumping to conclusions that just really shouldn't be made.
Right.
And I think she's right.
Okay.
But I think to be fair to Bernal, he's one of these guys that I think he opened doors in ways that have been useful.
Right.
That have it has kind of in some ways fostered a dialogue between disciplines that wouldn't have taken place. I remember a professor that I think probably both had at Calvin when we were at Calvin, Black Athena came out, and he was all in.
I'm going to guess it's Bert de Vries.
It is Bert de Vries.
The late Bert de Vries.
The late Bert de Vries, right.
Yeah.
I mean, who was not a classicist himself.
No.
But
archaeologist extraordinaire.
Yes, right. But he was all in on this thesis. And I don't think he had, in retrospect, I don't think he had thought it through very well.
Yeah.
I think he was very excited about the idea.
Sure. It's a really interesting idea.
Yep.
Well, and of course, Cleopatra, for example, was an African, but actually she was Macedonian.
Macedonian, right.
Yeah. And the Egyptians were as different from the rest of Africa in some ways as the Greeks are different from the Egyptians.
Yeah.
So there's just much more complexity than some of these facile arguments will allow.
Right.
Are you going to read us a good quote?
Yeah, maybe we can kind of cap off this
Okay.
with this is from Mary Lefkowitz. She opens the book with a chapter, and under the title, Are Ancient Historians Racist? And she starts, as the principal text in our second year Greek course, I prefer to use Plato's Apology, his account of the trial of Socrates. I stick with this traditional text, even though it is hard for students who have had time to learn only the bare essentials of Greek grammar, because it deals with so many matters that are central to our civilization. Should a man be condemned for his beliefs if they differ from the majority's? Why did the majority make a judgment that is now universally regarded as unfair? How could Socrates think that no man would willingly commit an evil act? Important questions all. But several years ago, I had a student who seemed to regard virtually everything I said about Socrates with hostility. Before she graduated, she explained why she had been suspicious of me in my classes. Her instructor in another course had told her that Socrates, as suggested by the flat nose in some portrait sculptures, was black. The instructor had also taught that classicists universally refuse to mention the African origins of Socrates because they do not want their students to know that the so-called legacy of ancient Greece had been stolen from Egypt. So she's...
That's a great way to start a book.
Right. Isn't it wonderful?
Yes.
So in her writings, she's not just responding to Bernal. She's really responding to kind of other scholars who kind of took that football and ran it down the field.
And the larger context in which she found herself.
Yes.
Starting a story with an anecdote from a classroom, brilliant.
That's gold.
It's really brilliant.
It is really good.
That's the way to go.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Jeff. So,
Yes.
In conclusion, right, we've given the audience a little bit of a way to think about secondary sources, some suggestions for ones they might want to pursue themselves.
Yes.
Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go next?
Next, I think we got to pick this up where we left off. I think we'll do our best to kind of get through the rest of our list.
Right.
We hope to get through in this episode, but we never get there.
No, and it was just so much fun that what's the rush, right?
Exactly.
So we have some people to thank, do we not, Dr.
We
Winkle?
do. As always, we got to thank Mishka, our wonderful engineer, who turns this around and so nicely and cleanly. Who else we got these? Who are these?
Oh, well,
these
we have
guys?
to thank the fellows that provide the screaming guitar, Mr. Scott Van Zen, the combination of Eddie Van Halen with the tapping and so forth.
Yep.
And the bluesy licks of Stevie Ray Vaughan.
So good.
Mr. Ken Tamplin, who gives us the bumper music for the ads and composed a lot of the other stuff that Scott is playing.
Yep.
Thank you for your generosity.
Yeah.
And what else, Jeff?
If people want to get in touch with us, if they got a question, they want a shout out, you want a suggestion, you got a corrigendum.
You want to be a guest on the show?
Yeah. You can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V.
Or you can write to Jeff at adnauseam, ADNAVSEAM.com, and one of us will get back to you in a timely manner.
Indeed. Yep. And if you want to check out other episodes, go to adnauseam.com. Again, don't forget that V. Check out our Lurch with merch section.
Yeah, you can click the shop link and get yourself a hat, get yourself a T-shirt, show that you're taking in the classics.
And keeping them down.
That's right.
And in this gift-giving holiday season, what better way to show this?
Speaking of gift-giving holiday season, are we going to do a kind of a seasonal episode?
I think it's always a good idea.
I've got some ideas, actually.
Fantastic.
So we'll have to workshop them off the air.
Yep.
And then see what we can come up with.
Sounds great. Yes. And Dave, I believe I have the gustatory parting shot.
You don't want me to hawk my wares?
Oh, sorry. What am I? It's there's that rust.
I know.
We haven't been down here, but
I'll be brief.
Dave, tell us about it. If somebody wants to learn Greek and Latin, what should they do?
They should go to mossmethod.com and check out my Greek program. It's larger and more successful than others, bringing in students from all over the world. I can take you from neophyte
to erudite.
That's correct. My 30 plus years of experience reading and teaching and studying and a little speaking Greek. I bring it all to bear in this course. Similarly, if you want to study some Latin, you might be thinking, what's a good Christmas gift to someone I love? Why don't you give them an introduction to the Latin language?
Great idea.
latinperdiem.com/LLPSI. Again, I will say there may be better programs. I'm not going to claim a kind of pedagogical superiority. But are there programs with a better value? I think not. The combination of price and expertise is unbeatable. Please check it out.
Excellent. Great.
And Jeff.
Yes.
Sorry. You have the gustatory parting shot. This is a long one.
It is a long one, but it's a fun one. So this comes from someone that we both like.
Very much.
Weird Al Yankovic.
We'd love to have him on the show.
And I believe it was this parody song in some ways that kind of put him on the map.
Absolutely. So are you going to sing
not.
3 stanzas, or are you going to read them like a beat poet?
I'm going to read them like a beat poet, but
right.
people who are familiar with the tune will hear it in their
All right,
heads. So this is his parody of Michael Jackson's Beat It, which he called Eat It.
Nice.
And it starts, how come you're always such a fussy young man? Don't want no Captain Crunch, don't want no Raisin Bran. Well, don't you know that other kids are starving in Japan, so eat it. Just eat it.
All right.
Don't want to argue, I don't want to debate, don't want to hear about what kind of food you hate. You won't get no dessert till you clean off your plate. So eat it. Don't you tell me you're full, just eat it. Eat it. Get yourself an egg and beat it.
Wait a minute.
What?
You skipped one eat it.
Well, that's the echo.
Okay.
Eat it, eat it.
So you are going to sing a little bit about it. All right, keep going.
Get yourself an egg and beat it. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried. Just
all right. Take in the classics.
Keep them down.